Have you ever stopped to wonder why some people seem to effortlessly attract success, abundance, and opportunities into their lives, while others struggle endlessly despite working twice as hard? What if I told you that the secret doesn't lie in what you do during your waking hours, but in a specific 90-second window that opens every single night just before you fall asleep? Most people have no idea that this window even exists. They go to bed exhausted, replaying the day's frustrations, worrying about tomorrow's challenges, or mindlessly scrolling through their phones until their eyes finally close. They're completely unaware that they're wasting the most powerful moment of transformation available to them, a moment that ancient civilizations spent centuries studying and mastering. Has this ever happened to you? You go to sleep wrestling with a problem that's been consuming your thoughts all day, and then you wake up the next morning with a crystal-clear solution that seems to have appeared out of nowhere. Or perhaps you've experienced that strange phenomenon where an idea you've been struggling with suddenly clicks into place the moment you open your eyes, as if someone reorganized your thoughts while you were sleeping. These aren't random occurrences or lucky breaks. They're glimpses into what your mind is actually capable of when you finally learn to work with it during those precious moments between waking and sleeping. The ancient Egyptians knew this secret. The Tibetan monks perfected it in their mountain monasteries. The sages of Alexandria documented it in scrolls that very few people ever had the privilege to read. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. These ancient masters understood something revolutionary that modern science is only now beginning to confirm. Your sleeping brain doesn't rest. It operates at a completely different frequency, one where the boundaries of what's possible become fluid and malleable. While your body lies still, your mind enters a state of consciousness that processes information at speeds your waking self could never achieve. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover has nothing to do with complicated visualization techniques, repetitive affirmations that don't work, or meditation practices that require years of training. This is about a method so simple you could apply it tonight, so ancient that entire civilizations built their wisdom upon it, and so powerful that just one correct application can generate changes that would normally take months or even years of conventional work. The truth is, there's a specific moment each night, a precise point where your conscious defenses dissolve completely, where your subconscious mind becomes entirely receptive to new programming. It's like having direct access to the control panel of your own reality, where you can adjust parameters and establish new settings while your body rests deeply. What you're about to learn will challenge everything you thought you knew about personal transformation, because we're going to completely dismantle the idea that you need to work hard during the day to achieve real results. The real power lies not in what you do when you're awake, but in what you program just before surrendering to sleep, in that sacred window where the impossible suddenly becomes within reach, and your deepest transformations can finally take root without the constant interference of doubt and fear. Think about the last time you woke up feeling like a weight had been lifted from your shoulders, even though you went to bed feeling overwhelmed. Or that moment when you opened your eyes and a creative solution to something you'd been struggling with for weeks was simply there, waiting for you like a gift. Your rational mind probably dismissed it as luck or coincidence, but what if I told you these experiences are actually proof of a hidden intelligence operating behind the scenes every single night? Your dormant mind isn't just resting while you sleep. It's working at a level of sophistication that would make the most advanced supercomputer look primitive by comparison. While your conscious awareness takes a step back, this deeper part of you begins reorganizing memories, processing emotions, connecting dots between seemingly unrelated pieces of information, and most importantly, accepting new truths about who you are and what you're capable of achieving. The real revelation here is that your nighttime consciousness operates without the burden of your ego's constant need to protect you from change. During the day, every new idea you have gets immediately filtered through years of conditioning, past failures, and limiting beliefs. Your mind automatically asks, but what if this doesn't work? What if I fail again? What if people judge me? These protective mechanisms keep you safe, but they also keep you stuck in the same patterns, living the same experiences over and over. If this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel. There's much more depth to explore about consciousness and transformation that you won't want to miss. But here's where the transformation truly begins. There exists a specific state of consciousness, a threshold moment that every human being passes through each night, where all these protective barriers naturally dissolve. It's that precise instant when you're no longer fully awake, but haven't yet crossed completely into deep sleep. Most people rush through this moment without even noticing it exists, but ancient wisdom traditions understood this was the gateway to reprogramming reality itself. In this liminal state, your subconscious mind becomes like an open door. There's no critic standing guard, no skeptic demanding proof, no fear whispering reasons why change is dangerous. What remains is pure receptivity, a consciousness so open that whatever you plant in it during these precious seconds will be accepted as truth, without question, without resistance, without the layers of self-doubt that normally sabotage every attempt at genuine transformation. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding the mechanics of how this works will change everything about how you approach not just your sleep, but your entire relationship with personal growth and manifestation. You see, most people have been taught that change requires immense effort, constant discipline, and years of hard work. They believe transformation is something you have to fight for during your waking hours, pushing through resistance and forcing yourself to adopt new habits through sheer willpower. But what if the real secret isn't about working harder? It's about working smarter by aligning yourself with the natural rhythms of consciousness itself. What if the reason so many people fail at transformation isn't because they lack dedication, but because they're trying to plant seeds in concrete when they should be waiting for the soil to become naturally receptive? The threshold state I'm describing operates according to principles that go far beyond simple psychology. When you enter this zone between waking and sleeping, your brain waves shift into a frequency that neuroscientists call the hypnagogic state. In this state, the boundary between your conscious and subconscious mind becomes permeable, creating a direct channel to the deeper programming that actually runs your life, the beliefs, patterns, and automatic responses that determine what you attract, what you avoid, and what seems possible or impossible to you. This is why a single declaration made in this state, spoken with genuine conviction, can accomplish what months of daytime affirmations never could. You're not trying to convince a skeptical mind anymore. You're speaking directly to the part of you that actually has the power to reshape your reality from the inside out. Write in the comments, I recognize this state, if you've ever felt that moment I'm describing, that subtle shift when your mind begins to drift and everything becomes more fluid and open to possibility. The implications of this become even more profound when you understand what's actually happening in your brain during those hours of rest. While your body lies motionless and your conscious awareness takes its nightly vacation, your mind enters a mode of operation that's nothing short of extraordinary. Scientific research has revealed that during sleep, your brain processes information at speeds up to 30 times faster than during your waking hours. Let that sink in for a moment. 30 times faster. This isn't just about reviewing the day's events or filing away memories like some biological computer running a backup. Your sleeping mind is engaged in a sophisticated dance of neural reorganization, creating new connections between ideas that your daytime thinking would never link together, finding patterns in chaos, and solving problems that seemed insurmountable just hours before. It's like having access to a quantum processor that only activates when your conscious mind steps aside and stops interfering with its natural genius. But here's what makes this truly revolutionary for your journey of transformation. During this accelerated processing state, your mind doesn't just work faster, it works fundamentally differently. It bypasses all the usual gatekeepers that normally block new information from taking root in your consciousness. Every declaration you make, every intention you set during that precious window before sleep becomes a seed planted in soil that's been prepared perfectly for explosive growth. While you rest, these seeds are being watered, nurtured, and accelerated by processing power that your waking mind simply cannot access. The stark contrast with your daytime mental operations reveals exactly why most people struggle so much with lasting change. During your waking hours, your conscious mind operates as the most restrictive filter imaginable. It's like having an overzealous security guard stationed at the entrance to your subconscious, checking every single thought against a massive database of past experiences, failures, and inherited beliefs about what's realistic or achievable. Every time you have an inspired idea or feel drawn toward a new possibility, this mental gatekeeper immediately springs into action. It pulls up evidence from your history of why this probably won't work. It reminds you of the last 3 times you tried something similar and fell short. It compares your current circumstances to your desired outcome and calculates all the reasons the gap is too wide to bridge. This mechanism evolved to keep you safe from genuine threats, but in the modern world, it's become a prison guard, preventing you from accessing the very transformation you desperately seek. This is why positive thinking and daytime affirmations often feel hollow and ineffective. You're essentially trying to convince a prosecutor who's already decided you're guilty. Your conscious filter is designed to maintain the status quo, to keep you operating within familiar parameters, even when those parameters are making you miserable. It treats any deviation from your established identity as a potential danger that must be evaluated, questioned, and usually rejected. The hidden truth that changes everything is this: transformation isn't about overpowering these daytime defenses through sheer force of will or endless repetition. It's about learning to work with your consciousness when these defenses naturally lower, when your mind shifts into that receptive state where new programming can slip past the guards and embed itself directly into your operating system. Think of it this way. Your daytime mind is like trying to write on a whiteboard that someone is constantly erasing as fast as you write. Your nighttime mind, especially in that threshold moment, is like having a blank canvas that eagerly absorbs whatever you paint on it, allowing the colors to set permanently while you sleep. The difference isn't in the quality of your intentions or the strength of your desire. It's simply a matter of timing and receptivity. This understanding completely transforms the game of personal development. Instead of fighting an uphill battle against your own psychological defenses 16 hours a day, you learn to plant your intentions during the brief window when the door is wide open, and then let your supercharged sleeping mind do the heavy lifting while you rest. Write in the comments, "My mind is ready," if you're starting to see why this approach is so radically different from everything else you've tried before. What happens next in this nightly journey reveals something that most people never consciously experience, even though they pass through it every single evening. As your body settles into rest and your breathing deepens, that vigilant guardian we talked about, the one that's been patrolling your mind all day, questioning every new idea and defending against change, begins to lose its grip. It's not a sudden switch, but a gradual dissolution, like watching a fortress slowly lower its drawbridge as night falls. This guardian has been working tirelessly since the moment you opened your eyes this morning, analyzing threats, comparing everything to your past, maintaining the boundaries of your comfort zone with military precision. But sleep is the one force it cannot resist. As your consciousness begins its natural descent toward rest, this protective mechanism weakens, falters, and eventually withdraws completely from its post. The walls come down, the filters dissolve, and suddenly you have access to a field of pure possibility where the ordinary rules of logic and limitation simply don't apply anymore. This isn't metaphorical, it's a measurable shift in your brain's functioning. The part of your mind that constantly narrates your experience, that judges and categorizes everything, that maintains your sense of separate identity, literally goes offline. And in that space of absence, something far more profound emerges. Your consciousness expands beyond the narrow confines of your daytime personality and touches something infinite, something that knows no boundaries or restrictions. What you're experiencing in these moments is what neuroscientists have mapped and measured, giving it the clinical name of the hypnagogic state. But long before modern science had the instruments to detect these brainwave patterns, ancient masters knew this territory intimately. They called it the door between worlds, and they understood it wasn't just a transition phase, but a distinct realm of consciousness with its own rules and possibilities. In this state, you're perfectly balanced on the edge between two realities. One foot still rests in the waking world with its solid sense of time, space, and physical limitation. The other foot has already crossed into the dream realm, where anything becomes possible, where you can fly or breathe underwater, where the laws of physics bend to imagination. This balance point, this threshold, is where the magic happens, not in some mystical sense, but in the very practical sense of being able to plant suggestions that your deeper mind will accept without resistance. Think about what this means for your personal transformation. Every change you've struggled to make during daylight hours, every habit you've tried to install through willpower alone, every belief about yourself you've attempted to shift through positive thinking, all of these efforts have been like trying to renovate a house while hostile security guards constantly interfere with your work. But in the hypnagogic state, those guards have clocked out for the night. The construction site is yours, and you can rebuild the foundation of your identity without anyone stopping you. The ancient masters who explored this territory weren't working with brain scans or neural imaging. They were working with direct experience, spending years learning to navigate these states consciously, discovering through trial and observation what modern science is only now confirming with data. They found that declarations made in this state carried a weight and authority that no amount of daytime repetition could match. A single clear intention planted in the hypnagogic state could accomplish what 1,000 affirmations spoken during full waking consciousness never could. This understanding transforms everything about how you approach the hours before sleep. You're no longer just going through a biological routine of rest and recovery. You're approaching a sacred threshold, a doorway that opens exactly once per 24-hour cycle, offering you direct access to the programming level of your own consciousness. Miss this window, and you'll have to wait another full day for the next opportunity. But catch it correctly. Speak your truth into that receptive space with clarity and conviction, and you set in motion forces that will work on your behalf all night long. Write in the comments, "I found my doorway," if something is clicking for you about why this specific moment holds such transformative power. The real power of understanding this threshold state becomes apparent when you realize what happens to intentions planted at the right moment versus those scattered throughout your day. Imagine the difference between dropping seeds on concrete pavement where they'll never take root, and placing those same seeds in rich, prepared soil at the exact season when conditions are perfect for growth. That's the distinction we're talking about here. Not a small incremental improvement, but a fundamental shift in the entire mechanism of manifestation. When you master the art of working with this nightly window, each evening becomes something far more significant than just the end of another day. It transforms into a golden opportunity, a reset button that gives you access to the deepest programming levels of your psyche. The intentions you plant during these moments fall into soil so fertile, so receptive, that they begin germinating immediately without encountering any of the resistance that normally sabotages your best efforts at change. There's no internal debate, no voice asking whether you're worthy or capable, no committee of past failures voting on whether this new reality is realistic for someone like you. But here's what most people don't realize about why their attempts at transformation keep failing. You're carrying around a mental security system so sophisticated, so deeply integrated into your awareness that you don't even notice it's running in the background every moment of your waking life. This system operates like the most advanced firewall ever designed, constantly scanning for threats, evaluating every new thought, inspecting every different idea, questioning every impulse for change that arises in your consciousness. This isn't happening at the surface level where you might catch yourself thinking negative thoughts. It's occurring in layers beneath your conscious awareness, making split-second judgments about what information gets through and what gets blocked. Every time inspiration strikes, every moment you feel drawn toward a new possibility, every instance when you imagine a different version of yourself or your life, this security system is right there running its protocols, cross-referencing against your historical data, determining whether this new input represents a threat to your established identity. And here's the thing that makes this so insidious. This system genuinely believes it's protecting you. It's not trying to keep you small or prevent your growth out of malice. It's attempting to maintain stability, to keep you safe within parameters that are familiar and predictable. The problem is that safety and transformation are fundamentally incompatible goals. Growth requires stepping into the unknown, and your mental security system treats the unknown as inherently dangerous. This is why someone can attend motivational seminars, read inspiring e-books, listen to empowering podcasts, and still find themselves stuck in the exact same patterns year after year. The information is getting in, the inspiration is real, but none of it can bypass the security protocols that activate the moment you try to implement actual change. Your system flags the new behavior as suspicious, references your past failures as evidence, and quietly redirects you back to familiar territory, all while making you believe it was your own decision to give up. The breakthrough comes when you understand that you don't need to fight this system or somehow permanently disable it. That would be neither possible nor desirable because it does serve legitimate protective functions. Instead, you learn to work with the natural cycle of when this security system powers down on its own. Every night, as you approach sleep, this sophisticated defense mechanism goes into standby mode. The guards step away from their posts. The gates open. And for those precious moments in the hypnagogic state, you have unfiltered access to reprogram your deepest patterns without triggering any alarms. This is why the ancient traditions placed such enormous emphasis on the moments before sleep. They weren't being poetic or mystical, they were being ruthlessly practical. They had discovered through direct experience what we're now confirming through neuroscience. There's a specific window when your mind becomes exponentially more receptive to new programming, when seeds planted will actually grow instead of being rejected as foreign objects by your psychological immune system. Write in the comments, My system is ready if you're recognizing how this internal security mechanism has been quietly blocking your transformation attempts and why the nighttime window changes everything. What happens in those moments when the restrictive filter finally powers down is nothing short of miraculous, though it's happening so naturally that most people pass through it without recognizing the significance. That door we've been talking about, the one that's been firmly shut for 16 consecutive hours while you navigated your day, suddenly swings open wide. Not a crack, not partially, but completely open, revealing access to a territory that remains utterly inaccessible during your waking hours. This is a space of infinite possibility, where the boundaries you accept as fixed during the day reveal themselves to be nothing more than temporary constructs of your daytime consciousness. This territory exists within you at all times, but your waking mind simply cannot perceive it. It's like having a massive library in your house, with rooms you've never entered, because you didn't know the doors were there. During sleep, particularly in that threshold state, those hidden doors become visible and accessible. You gain entry to resources, insights, and creative solutions that your daytime self would swear don't exist because they've never experienced them consciously. The profound implication here is that you're essentially living as two distinct versions of yourself, and understanding this changes everything about your approach to personal growth and transformation. Your daytime version operates within a tightly constrained framework. This version is heavily influenced by conventional logic, bound by social expectations, limited by what others have told you is realistic or achievable. It's the version that goes to work, pays bills, worries about what people think, and makes decisions based on what feels safe and socially acceptable. This daytime self isn't bad or wrong. It's necessary for functioning in the practical world, but it's also inherently limited, operating with access to only a fraction of your total cognitive capacity. It's like a computer running in safe mode, using only the basic functions required to maintain stability, while all the advanced features remain locked away. But when night falls, and this daytime version finally releases its grip on consciousness, something else emerges. Your nocturnal self awakens, a version of you that isn't constrained by the same fears and limitations. This aspect of your being has access to vastly greater cognitive resources, processing power that would seem impossible if you tried to quantify it. While your daytime self carefully evaluates every decision through the lens of past experience and potential failure, your nocturnal self can explore possibilities without that constant burden of judgment. This night version of you can make connections that would never occur to your waking mind because it's not limited by the need to justify every step logically. It can access memories stored so deep you've forgotten they exist. It can synthesize information from completely disparate areas of your life experience, creating insights that seem to come from nowhere when they surface the next morning. It's operating with the full database of everything you've ever experienced, learned, or absorbed, without the restricting filters that normally prevent you from seeing the bigger patterns. The real revelation in understanding these two versions is recognizing that they're both you, not separate entities, but different modes of the same consciousness operating under different conditions. The daytime version isn't fake, and the nighttime version isn't more real. They're complementary aspects that, when you learn to work with both intentionally, create something far more powerful than either could achieve alone. Most people live their entire lives allowing these two versions to operate independently, never consciously bridging between them. They make plans and set goals during the day using only their limited waking consciousness, then sleep without any intention, letting their vast nighttime intelligence work randomly on whatever happens to be in their thoughts. It's like having a brilliant consultant living in your house who only works when you're asleep, but you never actually give them any specific assignments. You just let them work on random problems while you're unconscious. The transformation happens when you learn to consciously delegate to your nighttime self. When you understand that those final moments before sleep are your opportunity to hand off specific challenges, intentions, or visions to the version of you that has access to resources your daytime mind cannot touch. You're essentially giving your nocturnal genius a clear assignment, and then getting out of the way while it does what it does best, processing, reorganizing, and creating pathways that your waking self would never discover through logical analysis alone. Write in the comments, "I'm meeting my other self," if you're starting to recognize this division in your own experience and seeing how bridging these two aspects consciously could change your entire trajectory. The processing capacity that becomes available to you during sleep goes so far beyond what most people imagine, that even the comparison to a supercomputer doesn't quite capture the magnitude. We're talking about something more akin to quantum computing, the ability to process thousands, possibly millions of different combinations simultaneously, exploring scenarios and pathways in parallel rather than the linear one-thing-at-a-time approach your waking mind is forced to use. Your ordinary consciousness can hold maybe 7 pieces of information in active memory at once. It can follow 1 or 2 trains of thought simultaneously if you're really focused. But your sleeping mind operates in an entirely different dimension of capability. It's running countless processes at the same time, testing combinations, exploring what-if scenarios, connecting dots between experiences that happened decades apart, finding patterns that would be invisible to your daytime awareness because it simply doesn't have the bandwidth to see them. This is why breakthrough insights so often arrive in the morning or even in the middle of the night. Your nocturnal processor has been working through permutations of your problem space at a speed that would take your waking mind years to accomplish through conscious analysis. It's finding solutions by exploring territory your daytime self would dismiss as irrelevant or unrelated, making leaps of logic that don't seem logical at all until suddenly they produce an answer that works perfectly. The impact of this becomes even more profound when you understand the sheer volume of information your sleeping mind has access to. Think of your consciousness as an enormous library, not just a room with some books, but a vast repository containing literally every experience you've ever had since the moment of your birth. Every conversation, every emotion, every sight and sound and taste, every lesson learned, every mistake made, every moment of joy or pain or confusion or clarity, it's all there, catalogued and stored in the stacks of your mental library. But here's the limitation that defines your daytime experience. During waking hours, you're navigating this massive library with only a small flashlight. You can illuminate a tiny section at a time, maybe peek at a few relevant memories when you need them, but the vast majority of your experiential database remains in darkness, inaccessible to your conscious awareness. You're constantly making decisions and forming judgments based on the fraction of information you can see with your limited beam of light, completely unaware of the wisdom and resources stored just a few shelves away in the darkness. When you enter sleep, especially during that threshold state we've been exploring, something extraordinary happens. It's as if every light in the library suddenly turns on simultaneously. The entire archive becomes illuminated and accessible. Your sleeping consciousness can reference any experience, draw from any lesson, connect information from completely different eras and contexts of your life. That embarrassing moment from 3rd grade might hold a key insight relevant to a business decision you're facing today. A conversation you had with a stranger 5 years ago might contain exactly the perspective shift you need right now, but your daytime mind would never make these connections because it simply can't see far enough into the stacks. This illuminated access is what makes nighttime intention setting so remarkably powerful. When you plant a clear declaration in that threshold moment, you're not just programming a small corner of your consciousness. You're activating the entire library, giving your nocturnal processing system permission to draw from your complete experiential database in service of manifesting that intention. Your sleeping mind can find resources, strategies, and solutions you didn't even know you possessed because they're synthesized from the total sum of your life experience rather than just the narrow slice you remember consciously. The hidden truth here is that you've never lacked the answers or the capability to transform your life. You've simply lacked access to the full resources that have been with you all along. It's like being locked out of your own treasure vault. The riches are there, they're yours, but you can't reach them during your normal waking state. The nighttime window doesn't give you something new, it gives you access to everything you already have, but couldn't see. Write in the comments, "My library is open," if you're recognizing that the answers you've been searching for externally might already exist within your own vast internal archive, just waiting for the lights to come on. This phenomenon of accessing hidden resources during sleep isn't just theoretical. It's been documented throughout history in ways that have literally shaped civilization. When you look at the stories behind some of humanity's greatest breakthroughs, you find the same pattern repeating over and over. The inventor struggling with a problem during daylight hours, hitting wall after wall, and then suddenly waking with the complete solution fully formed in their mind. The artist who spent weeks searching for the right composition, only to see it perfectly in a dream. The scientist who discovered a revolutionary formula that appeared to them in the moments between sleep and waking. These aren't isolated incidents or lucky flukes. They're examples of what becomes possible when brilliant minds accidentally tap into the processing power we've been discussing. Dmitri Mendeleev famously saw the complete periodic table of elements in a dream after struggling to organize them logically for years. Elias Howe couldn't figure out how to make his sewing machine work until a nightmare showed him the solution: needles with holes at the pointed end rather than the base. Auguste Kekule discovered the ring structure of benzene after dreaming of a snake eating its own tail. Paul McCartney woke up with the complete melody of Yesterday in his head, convinced he must have heard it somewhere before because it seemed impossible that something so perfect could just appear. What's fascinating about these stories isn't just that great discoveries happened during sleep. It's that these individuals had been consciously working on these problems intensely during their waking hours. They had loaded the question into their minds, saturated their conscious awareness with the challenge, and then their sleeping minds took over. When they finally stopped forcing solutions through conscious effort alone, they accidentally did what you can learn to do intentionally: delegate complex problems to the version of your consciousness that actually has the capacity to solve them. The ancient masters who studied consciousness transformation understood this dynamic at a level that goes far deeper than any individual breakthrough or discovery. They recognized that what we're really talking about here isn't just problem-solving or creativity, it's fundamental alchemy, but not the fairy tale version about turning lead into gold in some external laboratory. They understood that the real laboratory, the only one that matters, exists within your own consciousness during those altered states you experience each night. These traditions spoke about transmutation, the process of transforming base materials into refined essence, because they recognize that your consciousness during sleep becomes a crucible where everything limiting and heavy about your daytime identity can be transformed into something elevated and expansive. The fears that paralyze you during waking hours, the doubts that whisper you're not capable, the patterns that keep recreating the same frustrating experiences, all of this is raw material that can be transmuted when you learn to work with your consciousness in its most malleable state. The reason they called it alchemy is because the transformation isn't just psychological or emotional, it's fundamental. You're not just thinking differently about the same old you. You're literally reorganizing the substrate of your identity, changing the base code that determines what you perceive as possible, what opportunities you recognize, what actions feel natural versus impossible. This is why the results can seem miraculous to outside observers who don't understand the mechanics of what's happening. They're watching someone who appears to have completely transformed overnight, not realizing that the transformation has been occurring in the hidden laboratory of sleep. The ancient practitioners spent years mastering techniques to remain conscious during this alchemical process, to observe and direct the transformation rather than letting it happen randomly. But here's what makes this accessible to you without decades of monastic training. The basic mechanism activates automatically every single night. You don't need to master lucid dreaming or achieve enlightenment. You just need to understand the timing, the receptive window, and how to plant clear intentions that your nocturnal laboratory can work with while you rest. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to transform," if you're seeing how this ancient understanding of consciousness alchemy connects directly to your own nightly opportunity for fundamental change. Now let me show you how this principle manifests in real human experience, because theory only becomes powerful when you see it working in someone's actual life. There was a man who understood this truth not through study, but through desperate necessity. A merchant named Michael, who had inherited what should have been a prosperous silk business from generations of successful traders before him. His family name had meant something in the marketplace for decades, representing quality and trustworthiness that customers sought out specifically. But from the moment Michael took over, everything seemed to unravel. Despite working longer hours than his competitors, despite trying every strategy he could think of, every decision he made seemed to lead toward loss rather than profit. Investments that looked promising collapsed. Suppliers who had been reliable for years suddenly became unreliable. Customers who used to flock to his family's stall walked past without even glancing at his wares. Meanwhile, he watched other merchants around him thriving with what seemed like effortless ease, their businesses expanding while his shrank day by day. The weight of this failure consumed him. It wasn't just about money, it was about carrying the legacy of his ancestors and watching it crumble in his hands. Every empty hour at his stall felt like another confirmation that perhaps he simply didn't have what it took, that success belonged to other people, and he was destined to be the one who broke the family chain of prosperity. This kind of defeat goes deeper than financial stress. It attacks your fundamental sense of identity, making you question whether you have any real value to offer the world. On what he believed might be his last night before abandoning everything, something happened that would change not just his business, but his entire understanding of how reality actually works. An elderly woman appeared at his stall just as he was closing, someone he'd never seen before despite years of working that same location. She carried herself with a presence that made him pause, something in her eyes suggesting she saw far more than the struggling merchant and dusty silks in front of her. What she told him seemed impossibly simple, almost insultingly so, given the complexity of his problems. She spoke about his ancestors, about a secret they had known and practiced that had been lost in his generation. Not some elaborate ritual or complicated business strategy, but something so fundamental that its power had been hidden in plain sight. She revealed that reality itself responds to two specific words when spoken at the precise moment of maximum receptivity, the two words that define existence at its most basic level: I am. This wasn't about positive thinking or trying to convince yourself of something you don't believe. The woman explained that these words, when spoken in that threshold state between waking and sleep, carry a creative power that goes beyond anything the logical mind can comprehend. They're not affirmations hoping to change how you feel. They're declarations that literally reorganize the field of possibility around you, reshaping the invisible patterns that determine what opportunities appear, what resources flow toward you, and what version of reality you experience. Michael's ancestors hadn't built their success through superior business tactics alone. They had understood something about consciousness that gave them an advantage invisible to their competitors. Every night before sleep, they would enter that receptive state and speak their truth. I am prosperity. I am abundance. I am success. Not as wishes for the future, but as statements of present reality, and their external circumstances had no choice but to reorganize themselves to match the identity being declared in that moment of maximum creative power. The old woman didn't try to convince Michael with elaborate explanations. She simply gave him an assignment that would prove or disprove everything through direct experience. Take one piece of his silk, hold it each night as he approached sleep, and in that liminal moment speak the declaration with complete conviction. I am abundance. Do this for 7 consecutive nights without missing one, and see what happens. If nothing changed, he could return to his despair with certainty. But if something shifted, he would know he'd rediscovered the hidden mechanism his ancestors had mastered. Write in the comments, I am ready to begin, if Michael's story is resonating with something in your own experience of struggling despite your best efforts, and you're recognizing that perhaps the missing piece isn't strategy but consciousness itself. Michael made a decision that night that would alter everything, though at the time it felt more like surrender than choice. He had nothing left to lose, so why not try something that made no logical sense? That first night, lying in bed with his hand resting on the piece of silk, he felt ridiculous. The fabric was cool against his palm, and as he waited for that moment between waking and sleep, his mind flooded. With all the rational objections, how could words whispered to cloth possibly change anything about his failing business, his mounting debts, his crumbling legacy? But when that threshold moment arrived, when he felt his consciousness beginning to slip towards sleep, he spoke the words anyway. I am abundance. And something unexpected happened. The silk seemed to warm slightly under his hand, or maybe it was his imagination, but there was a subtle shift in the quality of the moment that he couldn't quite name. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a lightning bolt of certainty. It was just different enough that he noticed. The second and third nights followed a similar pattern. His daytime circumstances showed no change. The stall remained empty. The finances continued their downward spiral, and his skeptical mind kept insisting this was a waste of time. But each night in that liminal space, something felt like it was shifting in layers deeper than his conscious awareness could track. The declaration began coming more naturally with less resistance, as if some part of him was starting to accept it as truth, even while his waking mind still doubted. Then came the fourth night, and with it an experience that shattered every assumption Michael had been carrying about the nature of dreams versus reality. He fell asleep as usual after his declaration, but what followed wasn't a typical dream with its usual fragmented quality and nonsensical logic. This was something else entirely. A vision so vivid, so completely coherent, that he couldn't tell whether his eyes were closed or open. He saw his stall transform beyond anything he'd imagined during his waking hopes. The silks weren't just present, they were extraordinary, finer than anything he'd ever stocked, catching light in ways that made them seem alive. But what struck him most powerfully wasn't the merchandise. It was the people. There was a line of customers waiting patiently, not just browsing, but genuinely eager to purchase from him specifically. He could see their faces with perfect clarity, could sense their intention and desire, and the feeling that accompanied this vision was unlike anything he'd experienced in a normal dream. There was no uncertainty, no question of whether this might be possible. It carried a quality of absolute knowing, as if he wasn't seeing a potential future, but a reality that already existed and was simply waiting for the right conditions to manifest in his physical experience. When Michael woke from this vision, something fundamental had changed that had nothing to do with his external circumstances. For the first time in months, he felt certain, not hopeful in a desperate, grasping way, but certain with a calm knowing that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his thinking mind. The doubt that had been his constant companion had dissolved, replaced by a conviction he couldn't explain or justify through logic. He simply knew, in the same way you know the sun will rise, that what he'd seen was real, in a dimension that precedes physical manifestation. This is the power of what happens in that fourth night territory when you're practicing consistently. The first 3 nights are breaking ground, loosening the hardened soil of your established beliefs and patterns. But around the 4th night, something reaches a critical mass. Your sleeping consciousness has received the same clear instruction enough times that it begins reorganizing resources at levels you can't consciously perceive. The vision or knowing or certainty that emerges isn't wishful thinking. It's your deeper intelligence showing you what it's already building behind the scenes. Write in the comments, "My certainty is growing," if you understand how this kind of knowing is completely different from hoping or wishing, and you're ready to experience that shift from doubt to conviction through your own practice. The 5th day brought something that would have seemed impossibly insignificant to an outside observer, but to Michael it felt like watching the first crack appear in a dam that had been holding back an ocean. A woman walked past his stall, not just any woman, but someone he recognized because she had passed by hundreds of times over the past year without ever slowing down, without ever glancing at his merchandise, her pace never breaking, as if his stall existed in a dimension she simply couldn't perceive. But on this particular morning, something was different. She stopped, not with the hesitant energy of someone who might browse casually, but with genuine interest that seemed to pull her toward his display, as if she'd been searching for exactly what he offered. She asked questions about the silk with a knowledge that suggested she understood quality, and before he quite processed what was happening, she had purchased a piece. The transaction itself was small, barely enough to matter financially, but the shift it represented was seismic. What made this moment so significant wasn't the sale itself, but what it revealed about a transformation that had already occurred beneath the surface of visible reality. Michael noticed something in himself that hadn't been there before, a different quality in how he stood, how he spoke, how he met the customer's eyes. There was no desperate energy of someone trying to convince, no subtle pleading that comes from scarcity and fear. He was simply present, confident in a way that didn't need to announce itself because it was genuine rather than performed. The truth that crystallizes in moments like these is that external reality never changes first. It can't, because it's always reflecting back the frequency you're broadcasting from your core sense of identity. What had actually transformed during those 5 nights wasn't Michael's business, or his bank account, or the silk on his shelves. What transformed was something far more fundamental: the frequency at which his consciousness operated, the story he was telling himself about who he was and what he deserved, the filter through which he perceived possibility. This is the hidden mechanism that most people miss entirely when they're trying to change their lives. They focus all their energy on manipulating external circumstances, working harder, trying new strategies, forcing different actions, while their internal identity remains locked in the same old patterns of limitation and unworthiness. It's like trying to change what appears in a mirror by reaching toward the reflection instead of turning around to face what's actually being reflected. Michael's internal frequency had shifted during those nights of practice in ways his conscious mind couldn't track. Each time he declared, "I am abundance," in that receptive state, he wasn't wishing for abundance to arrive someday. He was literally tuning his consciousness to the frequency of abundance, adjusting his internal radio dial until it could receive signals that had always been broadcasting, but which he'd been unable to detect from his previous frequency of desperation and failure. This adjustment happened in layers deeper than thought, in the substrate where your sense of self is actually constructed. It's not about believing something intellectually or trying to convince yourself through repetition. It's about your entire system gradually realigning to a new baseline, a new default setting that determines what feels natural, what opportunities you notice, what actions seem obvious versus impossible. When this internal shift reaches a certain threshold, external circumstances have no choice but to reorganize themselves to match, because reality is fundamentally responsive to the consciousness observing it. The customer who stopped that morning didn't stop because Michael had better silk than he'd had the week before. She stopped because the person standing behind that stall was broadcasting a different signal, one that her own consciousness could finally recognize and respond to. The change wasn't in the merchandise or the location or the marketing. It was in the invisible but absolutely real frequency emanating from someone who had begun to identify as abundant rather than struggling, as successful rather than failing, as worthy rather than inadequate. Write in the comments, "My frequency is shifting," if you're recognizing that your own transformation needs to happen at this identity level first, before any external change can be permanent and authentic. What happened to Michael during those 7 nights reveals something that goes far beyond personal transformation. It shows us how consciousness itself operates as a mechanism of creation. Your sleeping mind isn't just processing the declarations you make before sleep. It's functioning as something far more powerful, something that can only be described as a cosmic amplifier, taking those subtle frequencies you plant in that sacred threshold moment and multiplying them exponentially throughout every layer of your being. Think about how an amplifier works with sound. You whisper into a microphone, and that barely audible vibration gets magnified thousands of times until it can fill an entire stadium, moving through the air with enough force to physically vibrate the chests of everyone present. Your nighttime consciousness operates on this exact principle, but instead of amplifying sound waves, it's amplifying intention waves, desire waves, identity declarations that you plant when your mind is most receptive. A single clear statement made in that liminal state gets multiplied throughout your neural networks, your emotional patterns, your unconscious behaviors, until what started as a whisper becomes a roar that reorganizes your entire reality from the inside out. This amplification doesn't happen through force or effort. It's a natural function of how consciousness works when it's operating in that expanded state we access during sleep. The same processing power that allows you to explore thousands of scenarios simultaneously, that illuminates your entire library of experience, that connects information across decades of stored memories. That same power takes your bedtime declaration and weaves it through every relevant pattern in your psyche, strengthening and reinforcing it until it becomes your new default setting. The reason this works so profoundly while daytime efforts often fail is captured perfectly in understanding the fundamental difference between malleable and rigid states of consciousness. During your waking hours, trying to change your core identity or deeply held beliefs is like attempting to reshape clay that's been baking under the desert sun for days. The material has hardened into a fixed form, and no matter how much pressure you apply, how desperately you try to remold it, you encounter nothing but resistance. The clay cracks before it bends. Your efforts leave surface scratches, but never penetrate to the core where real transformation would need to occur. This hardened state isn't a flaw in your consciousness. It's actually designed to maintain stability during your active hours, when you need consistent identity and predictable responses to navigate the world. But the problem comes when you're trying to evolve, when you need to become someone new, when your current hardened form no longer serves your highest potential. Trying to force transformation while operating in this rigid state is exhausting and usually futile, which is why so many people give up on change after months or years of effortful struggle that produces minimal, lasting results. But something miraculous happens when night arrives and you approach that threshold of sleep. Your consciousness begins to soften, to become pliable again, shifting into a state that's like fresh, moist clay in the hands of a master potter. All the rigidity that defined your daytime awareness dissolves. The hardened beliefs about who you are and what you're capable of become fluid again, open to being reshaped, and in this malleable state, the declarations you make don't encounter resistance. They sink directly into the clay of your consciousness, creating new forms, new patterns, new possibilities that will harden into your new reality as you sleep. This is why the ancient masters emphasized the importance of consciousness work during these transitional states. They understood something that modern culture has largely forgotten, that timing matters as much as technique when it comes to transformation. You can have perfect intentions, crystal clear goals, and powerful declarations, but if you're trying to implement them when your consciousness is in its hardened daytime state, you're working against the natural grain of how awareness actually functions. Wait for that window when the clay becomes soft again, and suddenly the same work that was impossible during the day becomes effortless, natural, almost inevitable. Write in the comments, I'm malleable now, if you're recognizing why your previous transformation efforts may have felt so exhausting, and you're ready to work with your consciousness during its naturally receptive state, instead of fighting against its rigid daytime form. The question that naturally arises when you learn about this practice is why specifically 7 nights? Why not 3 or 10 or 30? This isn't some mystical number chosen for symbolic reasons or because it sounds good in ancient texts. The 7-day cycle represents something far more grounded in the actual mechanics of how consciousness transforms itself when given consistent input during optimal conditions. Ancient masters didn't arrive at this time frame through guesswork or tradition. They discovered it through generations of careful observation, watching what happened when practitioners committed to different lengths of practice. They noticed patterns emerging, specific thresholds where qualitative shifts occurred, moments when accumulation of nightly declarations reached critical mass and triggered cascade effects throughout the entire psyche. 7 consecutive nights emerged again and again as the minimum duration required for intentions to move from surface-level impressions into deep structural changes that persist even when you're no longer actively focusing on them. This aligns with what we now understand about neural plasticity and habit formation, though the ancients knew it through direct experience rather than scientific measurement. Your brain needs time to rewire itself, to create new pathways and strengthen connections that support your desired transformation. One night plants a seed, but it hasn't taken root yet. The second night waters that seed and adds another layer. By the 3rd night, something is beginning to germinate beneath the surface, though you may not see visible evidence yet. Those first 3 nights are doing something crucial that isn't obvious from your conscious perspective. You're loosening superficial layers of resistance, creating small but significant cracks in the hardened walls of conditioning that have been blocking change for months or years or even decades. Think of it like the first stages of breaking through concrete. You're not smashing through to the other side yet, but you're weakening the structure, creating fractures that will eventually allow complete breakthrough. During this initial phase, Your conscious mind is still skeptical, still questioning whether anything real is happening. This doubt is normal and doesn't undermine the process because you're not working at the level where your conscious mind operates. You're working deeper, in layers where your declarations are being received and processed without the interference of your daytime skepticism. Each night, as you enter that receptive state and speak your truth, you're sending consistent signals that begin to override the old programming, even while your waking mind remains unconvinced. What's happening beneath your awareness during these first nights is that your sleeping consciousness is beginning to take your declarations seriously as a new directive. It's running scenarios, exploring possibilities, searching through your experiential database for resources and strategies that align with this new identity you're claiming. It's like assigning a research team to investigate a question. The first few days they're gathering information, making connections, finding relevant data. The breakthrough insights come later, but none of that would be possible without this foundational work. You might experience subtle shifts during this phase. Maybe you sleep differently, dream more vividly, wake with thoughts or feelings that seem slightly unfamiliar. Or you might notice nothing at all consciously, which is also perfectly normal. The lack of dramatic early signs doesn't mean nothing is happening. Underground seeds are germinating long before shoots break through soil into visible growth. Trust that the mechanism is working whether you can perceive it yet or not. This initial phase also serves another critical function. It's testing your commitment and consistency. The practice itself is simple, requiring only a minute or two each night, but maintaining it for 3 consecutive nights without skipping demonstrates to your deeper consciousness that you're serious about this transformation. It's the difference between casually mentioning you might want to change and actually showing up consistently to do the work. Your subconscious responds to demonstrated commitment, not just to stated intentions. Write in the comments, 3 nights down, if you're committing to this journey and recognizing that the first phase is about laying groundwork even before you see evidence of transformation in your external reality. Then comes the phase where everything begins to shift in ways that signal you've crossed an invisible threshold. Nights 4 and 5 mark the territory where the underground work of the first 3 nights starts sending shoots up toward the surface. This is when practitioners typically report their first undeniable signs that something fundamental is changing, not just in their thinking, but in the actual texture of their reality. The dreams during this phase often take on a different quality entirely. They're not the usual fragmented mental processing of daily events. These are dreams with unusual clarity, symbolic richness, or sometimes direct messages that feel like they're coming from a wiser version of yourself. You might dream of scenarios related to your declaration, seeing yourself embodying the identity you've been claiming each night. Or the dreams might be more metaphorical, finding hidden rooms in a familiar house, discovering treasure you didn't know existed, crossing bridges into new territories. Your sleeping mind is showing you that internal geography is shifting, that doors are opening to spaces that were previously locked. But it's not just the dream realm, where signs emerge. During your waking hours in days 4 and 5, you start noticing synchronicities that seem too perfectly aligned to be coincidental. A conversation overheard that speaks directly to your intention. A chance meeting with someone who has exactly the resource or connection you need. Information appearing at just the right moment, as if the universe is responding to your nightly declarations. These aren't random occurrences. They're evidence that your shifting internal frequency is beginning to attract different external circumstances, like tuning a radio and suddenly picking up stations that were always broadcasting, but which you couldn't receive from your previous setting. Your energy shifts too, in ways that are subtle but unmistakable once you notice them. You might find yourself moving through your day with slightly more confidence, making decisions more easily, feeling less weighed down by the doubts that used to follow you everywhere. It's not that all your problems have vanished, but your relationship to them has changed. There's a growing sense that you're supported by something larger than your individual effort, that forces are moving on your behalf in dimensions you can't see directly. This is the phase where faith transitions into knowing. You're no longer just hoping the practice works or trusting blindly that something might happen eventually. You're starting to accumulate direct evidence that the mechanism is real and responsive. Your sleeping consciousness has received the directive clearly enough now that it's beginning to reorganize resources, shift patterns, and create pathways toward the reality you've been declaring. The work is no longer theoretical, it's becoming tangible in your lived experience. Then comes the most crucial phase, nights 6 and 7. This is where everything you've been building reaches critical mass, where individual impressions coalesce into something cohesive and self-sustaining. Think of it like individual threads being woven into fabric. For the first 5 nights, you've been laying threads, creating the basic structure. But on nights 6 and 7, those threads interlock and become something with its own integrity. A new pattern that your unconscious accepts not as a possibility you're exploring, but as a truth about who you actually are. This tipping point is where transformation stops being something you're doing and starts being something you are. The declaration you've been making shifts from aspiration to identity. Your subconscious stops asking whether this new version of you is real and starts operating from the assumption that it is real, which changes everything about how you show up, what you perceive, and what you attract. The change has moved from surface disruption to structural reorganization. By the end of the 7th night, if you've maintained genuine consistency and conviction throughout the process, you've successfully implanted a new operating system. Your old default patterns have been overwritten with new programming that will continue running even when you're not consciously thinking about it. Write in the comments, "I'm at the tipping point," if you understand how these 7 nights work as a complete cycle of transformation, not just repetition, but actual reconstruction of your core identity patterns. Now here's where most people sabotage themselves before they even begin. And understanding this distinction could mean the difference between experiencing profound transformation and getting 0 results despite perfect execution of the technique. The fatal mistake happens in the setup phase, before you ever speak a single nighttime declaration. It's the mistake of trying to change everything at once, of approaching this practice with a scattered intention that touches 10 different areas of life, but penetrates none of them deeply enough to create real change. Think about the difference between sunlight and a laser. Sunlight is diffused energy. It can warm your skin, help plants grow, illuminate your day, but it cannot cut through steel. A laser takes that same light energy and focuses it into a concentrated beam so precise that it can slice through metal like butter. The energy isn't more powerful in absolute terms. The difference is entirely about concentration and focus. Dispersed energy creates gentle, generalized effects. Concentrated energy creates breakthrough transformations that seem impossible when you're thinking in terms of diffused effort. Your intention works exactly the same way. When you approach your 7 nights thinking you're going to improve your finances and your relationships and your health and your career and your creativity all simultaneously, you're creating diffused intention. Each area receives a tiny fraction of your focus, and none of them receive enough concentrated energy to break through the resistance that's been keeping them stuck. You end up with a practice that feels busy but produces minimal actual transformation because you're spreading yourself too thin across too many targets. This is why before you begin your first night, you need to make one of the most important decisions of this entire process. You need to choose a specific area, one clear, defined aspect of your life where you genuinely want to see transformation, not the complete wish list of everything you'd eventually like to improve, not a vague sense of wanting things to be better in general, but that single area where the gap between your current reality and your desired reality feels most significant, most urgent, most ready for breakthrough. Maybe it's your relationship with money and abundance, where despite working hard, you always seem to fall short of what you need. Perhaps it's a specific relationship that's been stuck in destructive patterns you can't seem to break free from. It could be your physical health that's been declining while you watch helplessly, or maybe it's that creative project or business venture that keeps calling to you but which you've been too afraid or unclear to actually pursue. The key is choosing one thing, the thing that when you imagine it transformed would create the most significant positive cascade effect throughout the rest of your life. This choice requires honesty with yourself about what truly matters most right now. Not what sounds most impressive to declare, not what you think you should want, but what genuinely represents the deepest longing or most significant block in your current experience. Your sleeping consciousness responds to authentic desire, not to what your ego thinks would look good. The more genuine and specific your choice, the more powerfully your nocturnal processing can work on your behalf. Once you've made this choice, your declaration becomes laser-focused. Instead of scattering your nighttime statements across multiple intentions, you're concentrating all that creative power into one clear beam. I am abundant if it's financial transformation. I am vibrant health if it's physical healing. I am creative flow if it's about unlocking your artistic expression. The specificity allows your sleeping mind to direct all its vast resources toward that single target, exploring every relevant memory, creating every necessary neural pathway, attracting every aligned opportunity toward that one defined outcome. This doesn't mean you can only ever work on one area of your life. After you complete your 7 nights and experience the transformation in your chosen area, you can absolutely begin another cycle focused on something different. But attempting to do everything simultaneously is the surest path to diluting your practice into ineffectiveness. Sequential focus beats scattered attention every single time when it comes to deep transformation work. Write in the comments, "I've chosen my focus," if you've identified that one area where breakthrough would matter most right now, and you're ready to direct all your nighttime power toward that specific transformation. Once you've chosen your focus, the actual practice itself becomes remarkably simple, almost deceptively so. There's a tendency to think that something this powerful must require complex rituals, elaborate preparations, or techniques that take years to master. But the truth is exactly the opposite. The power comes from the timing and receptivity, not from complicated procedures. Any attempt to make this more elaborate than it needs to be actually interferes with the natural mechanism you're trying to activate. When you're ready for bed, simply settle into whatever position feels most comfortable for rest. There's no special posture required, no need to face a particular direction, no specific hand positions or breathing patterns you must follow. Your body already knows how to prepare for sleep. Trust that wisdom. Let yourself sink into your pillow and mattress the way you naturally do every night. The only difference is that tonight you're approaching this transition with awareness and intention rather than unconscious habit. As you lie there, allow the concerns and thoughts of the day to gradually dissolve. This isn't about forcing your mind blank or fighting against thoughts that arise. It's more like watching clouds drift across the sky, acknowledging them, but not grabbing onto them. Each worry that surfaces, let it float past. Each mental to-do list, Release it gently. You're creating a quiet space, not through aggression toward your thoughts, but through soft redirection of attention away from the day's residue and toward the threshold you're about to cross. Then comes the moment itself, that liminal space you've learned to recognize. You'll feel it when your consciousness begins that familiar slide towards sleep, when the boundaries of waking awareness start to blur and soften. Your breathing has deepened naturally. Your body has released its holding patterns, and right there, in that perfect window of receptivity, you whisper your declaration, not shouted mentally, not repeated mechanically, just whispered with the quality of speaking a truth that already exists, waiting to be acknowledged. This brings us to what might be the most crucial element of the entire practice, the quality of conviction behind your words. Here's where people often get confused, thinking they need to manufacture belief in something they don't actually believe yet, trying to force themselves to feel certain about an outcome they secretly doubt is possible. But that's not what conviction means in this context. You're not trying to convince yourself of something false. You're recognizing something true that exists beneath the surface noise of your current circumstances. When you whisper, "I am abundant," or whatever your chosen declaration is, you're not making a statement about your current bank account or external situation. You're declaring an identity that exists at a deeper level of reality than your material circumstances. There's a version of you existing right now in potential form that already embodies this quality fully. Your nighttime declaration is calling that version forward, giving it permission to manifest, aligning your consciousness with a truth that precedes its physical expression. The conviction comes from recognizing this isn't wishful thinking. It's acknowledgement of what's real in a dimension that your physical senses can't yet perceive, but which your deeper awareness absolutely knows exists. It's the same knowing you have when you plant a seed, that this will become a plant, even though all you see right now is soil. The plant already exists in the seed's potential. Your abundant, healthy, creative, successful self already exists in your consciousness's potential. The declaration spoken in that receptive moment gives it the conditions needed to germinate and grow into visible form. This quality of speaking truth rather than hope changes everything about the energy of your declaration. Your subconscious can detect the difference immediately between someone trying desperately to believe something they doubt and someone calmly acknowledging a reality that already exists beneath the surface. Only the second type of declaration has the power to actually reprogram your deepest patterns, because it's being received as information rather than as a plea or wish. Write in comments, "I speak my truth," if you understand this distinction between hoping for change and declaring what's already real at a deeper level, and you're ready to bring that quality of conviction to your practice tonight. The principle of nighttime transformation, working at such profound levels, becomes even clearer when you understand how this wisdom was applied in ancient healing practices. There's a story that reveals something essential about the true nature of what happens when words are spoken to consciousness in its most receptive state. A story from the legendary healing temples of Epidaurus, where people traveled from across the known world seeking remedies for conditions that no conventional medicine could touch. In these temples, there was a woman named Rachel who served as guardian of the nocturnal wing. While other healers worked during daylight hours with their elaborate remedies, complex procedures, and impressive displays of medical knowledge, Rachel had discovered something that set her results apart from everyone else's. She had learned that the deepest healing, the kind that goes to the root cause rather than merely managing symptoms, didn't happen through external interventions applied to waking patients whose conscious minds were busy analyzing and resisting. True transformation happened when patients finally surrendered to sleep and Rachel could speak directly to their unconscious minds. She would sit beside sleeping patients and whisper specific truths into their receptive awareness, bypassing all the mental resistance that would normally block healing. These weren't general blessings or vague hopes for recovery. They were precise declarations spoken with absolute authority. You are whole. You are healed. Your body remembers its perfect blueprint and returns to it now. What made her approach so remarkably effective was that she understood something most healers missed entirely. The words weren't just encouraging thoughts meant to lift spirits or provide psychological comfort. They were operating as actual medicine at a level more fundamental than any physical substance could reach. When spoken to consciousness in that threshold state, these declarations became instructions that the body and psyche couldn't refuse because they were being received beneath all the layers of doubt, fear, and learned helplessness that normally prevent healing from occurring. This is exactly what's happening when you speak your nighttime declarations in that liminal moment before sleep. You're not just engaging in positive thinking or trying to boost your mood with uplifting words. You're administering medicine, cosmic medicine that works at the level where your identity, your beliefs, and your physical reality are actually constructed. These declarations are prescriptions being written directly into your operating system, instructions that your entire being receives as truth and begins implementing immediately at levels far too deep for your conscious mind to perceive. Your body and consciousness operate on a principle that's both simple and profound. They follow the instructions they're given by the highest authority. During waking hours, you're constantly giving conflicting instructions, mixing declarations of what you want with doubts about whether it's possible, affirming your desires while simultaneously reinforcing your limitations. Your system doesn't know which instruction to follow because you're broadcasting on multiple contradictory frequencies at once. But in that receptive nighttime state, when you speak with clarity and conviction, you're giving an unambiguous instruction from the highest level of authority, your own deep knowing. There's no interference, no competing signal, just a clear directive that your consciousness and body receive as law. And just as your body already knows how to heal a cut without your conscious involvement, just as it knows how to digest food and regulate temperature, automatically it knows how to manifest the reality you declare when that declaration reaches it, without the static of doubt and resistance. This is why the specific words matter less than the state in which you speak them and the conviction behind them. Rachel could have used different phrases with different patients, tailored to their specific conditions. What made the healing occur wasn't the particular arrangement of syllables, but the fact that she was planting truth seeds in soil that was perfectly prepared to receive them. At the exact moment when the patient's defenses were down and their entire being was open to reprogramming. Write in the comments, "I receive this medicine," if you're understanding that your nighttime declarations carry this same healing, transformative power when spoken into your own consciousness during its most receptive moments. The understanding of why timing matters so profoundly in this practice becomes even more compelling when you look at discoveries made by those who studied consciousness from entirely different angles. High in the mountains of Tibet, there was an astronomer named Timothy who spent years mapping celestial patterns. But his real breakthrough came when he started noticing something that had nothing to do with the stars themselves, and everything to do with the people observing them. Timothy tracked a peculiar phenomenon that kept appearing in his records: individuals who made significant declarations about their lives during specific moments related to sleep, particularly that threshold state between waking and dreaming, experienced manifestations that occurred with a speed and precision that seemed to defy normal causality. It wasn't that the universe was granting wishes randomly. It was that these people were somehow tapping into a rhythm, an invisible current that amplified their intentions exponentially when they aligned with it correctly. He realized that what he'd been studying in the movements of planets and Stars was actually a reflection of something happening within consciousness itself. The cosmic rhythms he observed in the heavens had corresponding rhythms in human awareness. There were optimal moments, windows of heightened receptivity, where the boundary between intention and manifestation became almost transparent. And the most accessible of these windows opened every single night during that liminal passage into sleep. This wasn't mysticism, it was observation of patterns that repeated consistently across different people, different circumstances, different intentions. Those who learned to work with these natural rhythms, who planted their declarations during these windows of optimal receptivity, achieved results that looked miraculous to those working against the rhythm or missing the window entirely. The difference wasn't in the quality of their desires or the strength of their will. It was purely about timing and alignment with consciousness rhythms that most people never learn to recognize. This principle of timing was understood with equal depth in another ancient center of wisdom, though approached from a completely different direction. In the legendary Library of Alexandria, there was a woman named Amanda Chen, who served as scribe of the twilight hours. While other scribes worked during the full light of day when visibility was easiest, Amanda had been given a specific assignment that revealed something crucial about when words carry maximum creative power. She was responsible for recording the most important decrees and declarations during that specific window when day transitions into night, when the light begins to fade and shadows lengthen. The court understood something that modern culture has forgotten, that there are certain transitional moments when words, spoken or written, carry a different weight, a different authority, a different capacity to actually reshape events, rather than merely describing them. Amanda discovered through her work that declarations made during these twilight moments had a way of manifesting in reality with unusual directness. It was as if the twilight state created a crack in the normal rules of causation, allowing words to slip through and become things, intentions to materialize as circumstances with far less resistance than they would encounter during full daylight or deep night. The transition itself was the key, that brief window when one state was releasing its hold and another hadn't yet fully established itself. This external twilight of day becoming night paralleled exactly what happens in your internal landscape when you transition from waking to sleeping. Your consciousness moves through its own twilight zone, and in that passage, the same principles apply. Words spoken, intentions declared, truths whispered during this internal twilight carry amplified power to reorganize your reality because you're catching the moment when one state of consciousness is dissolving and another is forming, when the clay is soft, when the door is open, when the usual rules of limitation and resistance temporarily suspend themselves. Write in the comments, "I align with the rhythm," if you're recognizing that this practice isn't just about what you say, but about catching the precise moment when what you say can actually penetrate and transform the deepest levels of your being. The principle of nighttime receptivity extends far beyond consciousness work alone. It actually touches physical matter itself in ways that challenge everything we think we know about cause and effect. There's a story about a potter named Brian Mitchell who stumbled onto this truth through his craft, discovering something that would completely transform not just his work, but his understanding of how intention and matter interact when both are in their most receptive states. Brian worked in a valley known for exceptional pottery, but he had developed an unusual habit that other artisans thought was eccentric at best. He did his most important work during the deepest hours of night, shaping clay when most people were sleeping, when darkness wrapped around his workshop and silence settled over everything. The other potters assumed this was just personal preference or artistic eccentricity, but Brian had discovered something they hadn't. that clay responds fundamentally differently when worked during these hours. The vessels he created at night possessed qualities that seemed impossible. According to conventional understanding, water stored in his containers tasted distinctly sweeter and more refreshing than water held in identical pottery made during daylight hours. Plants grown in his pots flourished with unusual vitality, producing more abundant growth than made sense given the same soil and care. The pieces themselves seemed to hold some quality that observers couldn't name but definitely felt. A presence, an aliveness that went beyond mere craftsmanship. What Brian understood intuitively was that he wasn't just shaping physical clay during those midnight hours. He was working with matter in a state of heightened receptivity that paralleled the receptivity of sleeping consciousness. The clay itself was more malleable, more responsive not just to physical pressure, but to the intentions he held while forming it. And because he worked in that liminal nighttime state when his own consciousness was quieter, more expansive, less constrained by daytime limitations, something of that expanded awareness transferred directly into the vessels he created. This same principle was discovered independently by a baker named Stephanie Wilson, who had developed a practice that baffled her fellow bakers, but produced results they couldn't deny. She prepared her dough during the deepest night hours, mixing and kneading when the world slept. But more significantly, she whispered specific intentions over each batch as she worked, for bread destined to be eaten. By families seeking prosperity, she whispered declarations of abundance. For loaves going to artists and students, she spoke words of creativity and inspiration. For ceremonial bread, she wove in intentions of transformation and awakening. The bread that emerged from her nighttime preparations carried something that went far beyond nutritional value or even exceptional taste. People who ate it reported experiencing shifts in their circumstances that seemed connected to the intentions Stephanie had planted. Families did find prosperity flowing more easily. Artists experienced creative breakthroughs. Those seeking transformation felt internal doors opening that had been locked for years. The bread had become a carrier of intention, infused with the consciousness of its creator during those hours when both the dough and the baker existed in that receptive nighttime state. What both Brian and Stephanie had discovered was that consciousness doesn't just affect your own internal reality. It affects the physical matter you work with when both you and that matter are in receptive states simultaneously. The clay, the dough, they're not inert substances waiting to be mechanically shaped. They're responsive to the consciousness that engages with them, especially during those nighttime hours when everything becomes more fluid, more open to receiving impression and holding intention. This reveals something profound about your own nighttime practice. You're not just working with abstract consciousness or invisible intentions. You're working with the actual substance of your being, the neural pathways, the cellular memory, the energetic patterns that constitute your identity and determine your reality. And just like Brian's clay and Stephanie's dough, this substance of your being becomes maximally receptive during nighttime hours, able to receive and hold the imprint of your declarations in ways that simply aren't possible during the hardened, resistant state of daytime. Unconsciousness. Write in the comments, I am the creator, if you're seeing how your nighttime declarations aren't just thoughts floating in space, but are actually shaping the malleable substance of your consciousness during its most receptive state, imprinting new patterns that will harden into your new reality. The relationship between nighttime receptivity and actual physical transformation reaches perhaps its most striking expression in the practice of a gardener named Joshua Phillips, who cultivated what became known as the Midnight Gardens. While conventional gardeners worked during daylight hours when they could see what they were doing, Joshua had discovered that something fundamentally different occurred when seeds were planted in complete darkness, during the deepest hours of night, when even moonlight was absent. His practice seemed absurd to those who observed it from the outside. He would descend into his garden plots, carrying carefully selected seeds, working entirely by touch in absolute darkness, and before placing each seed into the earth, he would hold it in his palm and whisper what he called ancestral truths to it. Not generic blessings or hopeful wishes, but specific declarations about the purpose that plant would serve, the medicine it would carry, the transformation it would facilitate in those who eventually consumed its fruit or used its leaves. The results defied every principle of normal horticulture. Plants that should have taken months to mature were flourishing in weeks. Flowers that had no business growing at that altitude were producing blooms of colors nobody had seen before. Medicinal herbs contained potencies that multiplied far beyond what ancient texts described as possible. Joshua's garden became legendary, not because he had superior techniques or secret fertilizers, but because he had discovered how to work with the consciousness of seeds themselves during their most receptive moment. That darkness before germination where potential is completely fluid and open to receiving instruction about what it will become. The seeds, like your sleeping consciousness, carry within them infinite possibility. They can become any variation of their species, depending on the conditions and instructions they receive. When Joshua whispered his truths to them in darkness, before they encountered any external input or resistance, those declarations became part of the seed's blueprint for growth. The instruction didn't just influence the plant. It became integrated into its fundamental structure, determining not just how it would grow, but what properties it would express, what effects it would have on those who interacted with it. This brings us full circle to the ultimate truth that unifies everything we've explored together. The ancient alchemists spent lifetimes searching for the philosopher's stone, that legendary substance that could transform base metals into gold and grant immortality to whoever possessed it. They built elaborate external laboratories, conducted countless experiments with physical materials, wrote cryptic texts describing complex procedures that required years of study to decipher. But what they were really describing, what the wisest among them always knew, was never about transforming external metals at all. The true philosopher's stone they sought exists in the most sophisticated laboratory that has ever existed or ever will exist, your own sleeping consciousness during those threshold moments between waking and dreaming. This is where actual transmutation occurs, where the heavy base metal of fear, doubt, and limitation gets transformed into the gold of infinite possibility, expanded awareness, and realized potential. The external alchemy experiments were always just symbolic representations of this internal process, teaching tools for those ready to understand where real transformation happens. Every night when you enter that liminal space and speak your truth, you're engaging in the most authentic form of alchemy possible. You're taking whatever is dense and limiting in your current experience and subjecting it to the transmutational fire of focused intention spoken during maximum receptivity. Fear becomes courage. Scarcity becomes abundance. Confusion becomes clarity, not through external manipulation or forced effort, but through the natural alchemical process that activates when consciousness works on itself during its most malleable state. This is the hidden laboratory that's been available to you every single night of your life, though you may never have known how to consciously work with it until now. The philosopher's stone isn't something you need to find or create. It's the mechanism of your own sleeping consciousness when you finally learn to direct it with clear intention during that sacred window. Write in the comments, "I've found the stone," if you're recognizing that what you've been searching for externally has been within you all along, waiting for you to discover how to activate its transformative power through this simple nighttime practice. So here we are, at the end of a journey that's really just the beginning of something much more significant. If you've stayed with me through this entire exploration, through all these stories and principles and revelations about the power that activates every night in that sacred window before sleep, then something inside you recognized this wasn't random information. This was meant for you right now. At this exact moment in your life, the knowledge you've gained here is only as valuable as what you do with it tonight when you lay your head down and approach that threshold with new awareness. And if this resonated with you, if you felt that spark of recognition throughout our time together, I'd love for you to subscribe to this channel. There's so much more to explore about consciousness, transformation, and the hidden mechanisms that shape reality, wisdom that's been preserved across centuries and is finally becoming accessible to those ready to receive it. Let me know you made it all the way through by writing in the comments, "This message was meant for me." Those words aren't just confirmation for me. They're a declaration to yourself that you're ready to step into this practice, that you recognize the significance of what you've discovered here. And if something shifted in you while we explored these ideas together, go ahead and hit that like button. It helps this knowledge reach others who are searching for exactly what you just found. There's a video right here that takes what we've covered today even deeper, revealing specific techniques that amplify this nighttime practice in ways that can accelerate your transformation beyond what we've discussed. Click and continue with me over there, because what you've learned tonight is powerful. But what's waiting in that next video will show you how to multiply that power exponentially. Tonight is different now. You know what that 90-second window means. You understand the laboratory you're entering. Go make this night count.